The diner sat on the corner of a quiet street, where passing cars were few and most customers were familiar faces. Every morning before sunrise, the smell of coffee filled the small space, mixing with the sound of sizzling bacon and the faint hum of an old refrigerator that never stopped buzzing. Behind the counter worked a young woman named Lena. She moved quickly between tables, balancing plates, refilling cups, and greeting customers with a polite smile that never showed how tired she really was. Lena had been working there for almost 3 years. It wasn't the life she had imagined when she was a child, but it was the only thing keeping her and her mother afloat. Her mother's health had declined after an accident that made it impossible for her to work. Every paycheck Lena earned went straight to rent, medicine, and groceries. She rarely bought anything for herself, not even a new pair of shoes. Yet she never complained. People in town often said she was the kind of girl who made you feel lighter just by being around. When the morning rush ended, Lena would wipe the tables slowly, sometimes humming under her breath. Her voice was soft, but the tunes she hummed had a sadness to them, a kind of longing that made people stop and listen. The owner of the diner, a kind woman named Mrs. Taylor, often teased her about it. "If you keep singing like that, my customers will forget to eat," she would joke. Lena would laugh, her cheeks turning red, and go back to work. There was an old upright piano in one corner of the diner. It had been there since before Lena was born. The keys were yellowed, a few of them chipped, and 3 didn't work at all. Hardly anyone touched it anymore. But to Lena, that piano was magic. As a little girl, she had always been drawn to music. When she was 12, she found an old keyboard at a garage sale for $5. Half the keys didn't make any sound, but she practiced on it every night until she memorized songs by ear. After her father left, music became the only thing that made her feel safe. She couldn't afford lessons, but she listened to recordings online and watched old videos to learn how to move her fingers. She didn't know if her technique was right, but she didn't care. When she played, it felt like her worries faded away. Now, whenever the diner was empty, she would quietly sit at the piano and play. It was usually late at night after closing. The lights would be dim, the chairs stacked on tables, and only the street lamp outside lit the room through the window. Her fingers would glide over the keys and melodies would fill the silence like whispers from her heart. She didn't play for anyone else, only for herself, for her mother, and maybe for the memories she didn't speak about anymore. One evening, rain was falling hard outside. Most customers had already gone home, except for one older man who always came in on Thursdays. He usually ordered black coffee and a slice of pie, then sat reading the newspaper quietly. Lena liked him because he never complained about anything. That night, when the clock struck 10, she thought he had already left. She closed the cash register, turned off half the lights, and walked toward the piano. Her hands hesitated over the keys at first. She wasn't sure why she wanted to play, but something inside told her to. The sound of the rain tapping on the window mixed with the soft notes as she began. It wasn't any song in particular, just something she made up as she went. Slow, calm, then growing stronger, like a story told without words. She didn't notice the man sitting in the corner, watching quietly. When she finished, the sound lingered in the air for a moment before fading. She turned and froze when she saw him smiling gently. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said, putting down his newspaper. "You play beautifully." "Oh," Lena said, embarrassed. "I didn't know anyone was still here." He chuckled. "I'm glad I stayed. Where did you learn to play like that?" Lena shook her head. "I didn't really learn, I just play what I feel." The man looked thoughtful for a moment, then said, "That's the best kind of music." He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small folded flyer. "There's a local piano competition next month. My niece is part of the committee." "You should think about joining," Lena laughed softly. "A competition? I'm just a waitress. I don't think they'd want someone like me there." He slid the flyer across the counter anyway. "Talent doesn't care about where you work. It's about what you carry inside." She didn't know what to say. He smiled again, left a few bills on the counter for his coffee, and walked out into the rain. Lena stood there for a long time, staring at the flyer. It was slightly wet from his hands. "Open auditions, regional piano showcase. All ages welcome." That night, when she got home, she placed the flyer on her small desk beside her bed. Her mother was asleep, breathing softly. Lena watched her for a moment, then sat down and traced the printed letters with her finger. Could someone like her really stand on a stage in front of judges and play? The thought felt ridiculous. She didn't have fancy clothes, a good instrument, or training. She didn't even have the confidence to perform in front of people. Still, she couldn't throw the flyer away. The next few days went by as usual. Early mornings, long shifts, customers asking for refills, children dropping crumbs on the floor, but the idea wouldn't leave her mind. Sometimes when she was pouring coffee or writing down an order, she'd think about that stage, the piano shining under the lights, and what it would feel like to sit there. Late one night, she told her mother about it while helping her take her medicine. Her mother looked at her with tired but kind eyes. "You've always loved music," she said softly. "Why not try? You don't have to win. Just play." Lena smiled, though she didn't answer right away. She wanted to believe it was possible, but her doubts were louder than her hopes. The next evening at work, she looked at the piano again. It seemed older than ever. Dust had settled in the corners and one of the pedals squeaked when pressed. But it was all she had. When the last customer left, she set up her phone on the counter and pressed record. Her hands were shaking as she sat down. She took a deep breath and began to play the same melody she had played that rainy night, the one that seemed to come from nowhere. This time she added more to it, letting her emotions lead the rhythm. The sound wasn't perfect. The broken keys made small gaps in the music, but she kept going. Her face showed every feeling she had kept inside, the exhaustion, the hope, the memories of better days. When she finished, she looked at her phone and hesitated. She almost deleted the video, but then she thought of her mother's words. Maybe she didn't need to be perfect. Maybe she just needed to try. So she uploaded it to the competition's website before she could change her mind. That night, she lay in bed wide awake, replaying every mistake in her head. What if they laughed at her? What if no one even watched the video? But another thought came quietly. What if someone did? Weeks passed, and she almost forgot about it. Life went on. Endless shifts. The same regulars, the same songs playing from the diner's radio. Then one morning, while wiping the counter, her phone buzzed. It was an email. She almost ignored it until she saw the subject line. "Congratulations. You've been selected for the regional piano showcase." Her heart stopped for a second. She read it again, thinking it had to be a mistake, but it was real. The message included the date of the event and a request for confirmation. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She quickly showed the email to Mrs. Taylor, who hugged her so tightly that the coffee pot almost fell. That afternoon, everyone at the diner knew. The cook cheered, the dishwasher clapped, and one of the regulars said he'd come watch her perform. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt something she had forgotten: pride. But when the excitement faded, reality hit. She didn't have a proper outfit, or shoes suitable for a stage. She had never even touched a grand piano before. The thought made her stomach twist with nerves. Still, deep down, something told her she couldn't back down now. That night, after closing, she sat at the piano again. The street outside was quiet. The moonlight reflected off the window, and she looked at her hands, the same hands that served food and washed dishes every day. They were rough, but they had learned to create something beautiful. She placed them on the keys and whispered to herself, "Let's see how far we can go." The first notes echoed softly through the diner, and with every sound, she felt her fears fade just a little more. The day after Lena got the email, she woke up before sunrise, still half in disbelief. The screen on her phone glowed softly beside her bed, showing the same message she had read again and again last night. She hadn't dreamed it. She had really been selected. For a few moments, she just sat there in silence, staring at the message, afraid that if she blinked too long, it might disappear. Her mother was already awake, sitting near the window with a cup of tea. When Lena showed her the phone, her mother smiled, her eyes shining in a way Lena hadn't seen in a long time. "See?" she said softly. "I told you. You just had to try." Lena felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. She didn't know what came next. The email said finalists would perform live in 2 weeks at the city auditorium. She had never even been to the city. It felt like a different world. People dressed in fancy clothes, music halls shining with lights, judges sitting with serious faces. She couldn't imagine herself there, walking in with her old coat and worn shoes. Still, she couldn't back out now. After breakfast, she opened her laptop, which was slow and cracked on one corner, and searched for videos of past competitions. She watched performers on big stages, their fingers moving gracefully across the piano, their posture perfect, their faces calm. They looked so confident, like they belonged there. She bit her lip, thinking, "What am I doing?" That evening, she went to work at the diner as usual. Everyone there was still talking about her selection. Mrs. Taylor told every customer who came, in proudly saying, "Our girl here's going to play on a big stage soon." Lena felt shy but also happy. The regulars congratulated her, some joking that they'd charge for autographs later. After the rush hour ended, the same old man who had given her the flyer walked in. The moment she saw him, she smiled. He gave her a small nod, his eyes warm with pride. "I heard the good news," he said. "Looks like you're going to that competition after all." Lena thanked him, unsure what else to say. She wanted to tell him how scared she was but couldn't find the words. He seemed to understand anyway. "You'll be fine," he said gently. "Don't try to impress anyone. Just play like you do here, honest and from the heart." Those words stayed with her for the rest of the night. The next day, during her short lunch break, she went to the church down the street. The pastor there had once mentioned they had an old piano for choir practice. She asked if she could use it after work for a few days. The pastor agreed kindly, saying, "Of course, music is meant to be shared." So, every evening after closing, the diner, Lena would walk there with her coat buttoned up against the cold wind. Inside the quiet church, she practiced until her fingers ached. The piano there was still old but less broken than the one at the diner. The first few nights she stumbled, nervous even when alone. But little by little, she started finding her rhythm again. She practiced the same melody she had played in her audition video, the one that came from her heart that rainy night. She wanted to make it better, fuller, more alive. Sometimes she added new notes without thinking, and they fit perfectly, as if they had been waiting for her to find them. When she played, memories would drift into her mind. Her father teaching her how to whistle before he left, her mother clapping when she learned her first tune on that broken keyboard, the nights she'd sit by the window listening to rain. Each memory found its place in her music, shaping the emotion behind every sound. One evening while she was playing, she noticed someone standing by the church door. It was Mrs. Taylor, still in her diner apron. "Don't stop," she said softly. "I just came to listen." Lena smiled shyly and continued playing. When she finished, Mrs. Taylor had tears in her eyes. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "You're going to move people with that, I can feel it." Hearing that gave Lena strength she didn't know she had. As the day of the competition got closer, she started worrying about small things: what to wear, how to travel, how to afford the trip. The diner staff decided to surprise her. On her last shift before the event, they gathered in the kitchen and handed her a small envelope. Inside was some money they had collected together. "For your train ticket," Mrs. Taylor said, smiling. "And maybe a nice dress, too." Lena was speechless. Her throat tightened as she tried to thank them. "You've been serving us for years," said the cook. "Now it's time the world serves you back." The morning of the competition arrived before she knew it. The city felt overwhelming. Tall buildings, busy streets, people rushing in all directions. She carried a small bag with her dress, a pair of flats, and a music sheet, though she knew she wouldn't really need it. When she entered the auditorium, her breath caught. The stage looked enormous. The grand piano stood at the center, shining under the spotlights like something sacred. She could hear faint music coming from backstage, other contestants warming up. Their notes floated through the hall clean and sharp, like they had been playing since birth. Her hands started to tremble. She found a corner to sit in and watch the others. Some wore suits, some elegant dresses. One had a small team helping tune the piano before her turn. Lena felt smaller by the second. She whispered to herself, "You don't belong here." But then she heard her mother's voice in her head, calm, gentle, "Just play." A woman with a clipboard called her name. Her heart raced so fast she thought she might faint. She walked toward the stage slowly, her palms sweating, her legs heavy. The lights were brighter than she expected, almost blinding. She could barely make out the audience, rows of faces watching silently. She sat down at the piano. For a few seconds, she just looked at the keys. Her reflection stared back from the glossy surface. Then she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The first notes were quiet, almost hesitant. Her fingers trembled slightly. But soon they found the pattern she had practiced so many times. She imagined she was back at the diner. The smell of coffee, the hum of the lights, the sound of rain outside. Slowly, her fear began to fade. The music took over, the melody swelled, filling the auditorium. Every sound seemed to carry her memories, her struggles, her hopes. People in the audience stopped whispering. Even the judges leaned forward slightly, their faces thoughtful. She played as if speaking to them without words. About the nights she stayed awake worrying, about her mother's smile, about the old piano that had taught her everything. When she reached the final note, she held it for a long second, then lifted her hands. The sound faded into silence. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then, slowly, applause began. Soft at first, then louder, stronger, filling the room. Lena sat frozen, not sure if it was real. She looked up and saw one of the judges standing. He nodded once, a small but genuine gesture of respect. Her chest filled with emotion she couldn't describe. She stood, bowed slightly, and walked off stage with shaky legs. Back in the hallway, she leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Her heart still raced, but this time it wasn't fear. It was relief. She had done it. She had played. Maybe not perfectly, but truthfully. A few minutes later, the older man from the diner appeared behind the crowd. He had come to watch, though she hadn't known. "You see?" he said with a proud smile. "I told you the world needed to hear you." Lena could barely speak. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me." He laughed softly. "No need to thank me, I just saw what was already there." As the competition went on, she sat in the audience watching others perform. They were brilliant, fast, polished, professional. She didn't think she'd win, but strangely, that didn't bother her. For the first time, she felt she had truly lived, even if just for those few minutes on stage. When the winners were announced later, her name wasn't among the top 3. But to her surprise, she received a special mention for exceptional emotional expression and originality. The judge who had stood during her performance handed her the certificate himself. "Keep playing," he said. "You have something that can't be taught." That night, as she rode the train home, Lena held the certificate in her lap, smiling quietly. Outside the window, city lights faded into darkness. She thought of her mother waiting at home, of the diner, of the old piano in the corner. For once, the future didn't seem so distant. It felt like something she could reach, note by note, if she just kept playing. The train pulled into the small-town station just as the sun was beginning to rise. The sky was soft and pink, and everything felt quiet, like the world had paused for a moment. Lena stepped off, carrying her small bag and the certificate in her hands. She was still tired from the long ride, but her heart felt light. Every now and then she would look down at that piece of paper again, just to remind herself that it was real. Her mother was waiting for her outside the station, sitting on a bench, wrapped in her warm shawl. The moment she saw Lena, her face lit up with pride. "I knew you'd make us proud," she said softly. Lena hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth and comfort she had missed during those busy days. When they reached home, the little apartment felt different, still small, still humble, but somehow filled with more hope. The certificate went straight to the wall beside their family photo, and for the first time in a long while, Lena caught herself smiling just by looking at it. That afternoon, she went back to the diner. The bell over the door jingled, and the familiar smell of coffee and baked bread welcomed her. Mrs. Taylor and the others were waiting. As soon as she walked in, everyone started clapping. The cook shouted, "There she is, the star of the city." The whole diner filled with laughter and cheer. Lena blushed and waved her hands. "I didn't win," she said quickly. Mrs. Taylor smiled. You don't need a trophy to win. You already did. Someone brought out a small cake with congratulations written in shaky icing. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make her eyes water. For a moment, she forgot about her worries and just enjoyed being surrounded by people who truly cared for her. Over the next few weeks, life began to settle again. But something inside Lena had changed. She still worked long hours, still took care of her mother, still wiped tables and poured coffee. Yet every time she passed the piano in the corner, she felt something stir, like a quiet whisper reminding her she had more to give. People from around town started coming in just to hear her play. On slow evenings, Mrs. Taylor would nod toward the piano and say, "Give them a song." Lena would smile shyly, sit down, and play one of her simple, heartfelt melodies. The customers would fall silent, listening. Some even closed their eyes, letting the notes carry them away. Word spread slowly. A local journalist came by one afternoon after hearing about the waitress who played like a dream. He asked if he could write a small story for the town newspaper. Lena didn't think anyone would care, but she agreed. A week later, her photo was printed on the front page with the headline, "From Coffee Cups to Concert Halls, the waitress who won hearts with her piano." It was just a short article, but it changed everything. A few days later, she received an email from a local community center in the city. They were hosting a fundraiser event and wanted her to perform. At first, she thought it was a mistake, but when she called to confirm, they said they had seen her competition performance online. Someone had uploaded the video. She hesitated for days before replying. Part of her was afraid it was too soon. Another part of her remembered how alive she had felt on that stage. Finally, she said yes. The following week, she took the train again, her mother's scarf wrapped tightly around her shoulders. This time, she wasn't as nervous. The venue was smaller than the competition hall, more like a cozy community theater. The audience wasn't filled with judges, just families, neighbors, and people who came to enjoy an evening of music. When she sat at the piano, she took a deep breath and began to play the same song she had played before, the one that had started it all. But this time she added something new. The melody rose higher, brighter, filled with a quiet kind of joy. When she finished, the applause that followed felt warm and personal. After the show, several people came up to thank her. A young girl shyly asked if she could take a picture with her. An older woman said, "You reminded me of my daughter. She used to play before she passed away." Lena held her hand gently, her eyes misting. It wasn't about fame or applause anymore, it was about connection. Her music was touching lives. As she packed her things that night, a man approached her backstage. He introduced himself as Daniel, one of the judges from the piano competition. She recognized him instantly. He was the one who had stood up during her performance. "You have a gift," he told her. "Not just skill and emotion. That's what people remember." She thanked him quietly, unsure what else to say. He continued, "I work with a small foundation that supports young musicians. We give scholarships, mentorship, and performance opportunities. I'd like you to apply. You won't have to pay anything. We just want to help people like you grow." For a moment, Lena didn't move. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. A scholarship, lessons? It sounded too good to be true. But Daniel smiled kindly. "Think about it. You belong on that stage, Lena." On the train home, she stared out the window, thinking about everything he had said. The lights of the city slowly faded into the dark countryside. Her mind raced with both excitement and fear. What if she wasn't good enough? What if they changed their mind once they saw how little she knew? When she got home, her mother was waiting up. She listened quietly as Lena explained what had happened. Then she took her daughter's hand and said softly, "Opportunities don't come twice. If someone believes in you, believe in yourself too." That night, Lena barely slept. She filled out the online application, attached her performance video, and sent it before she could lose her courage. Then all she could do was wait. Days turned into weeks. She checked her email every morning before work. Nothing came. Slowly, she began to convince herself it wouldn't happen. Maybe there were other, more talented musicians. Maybe she was still just a waitress who loved to play. Then, one afternoon at the diner, while she was cleaning tables, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the foundation. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "Congratulations," it began. "You've been selected for our mentorship program." She froze. The customers around her blurred out. She read the message again and again. Mrs. Taylor noticed her expression and rushed over. "What is it?" Lena looked up, her eyes shining. "They picked me," she whispered. The whole diner erupted in cheers once again. Even the cook came out of the kitchen with flour on his hands. Someone turned on the radio and started clapping to the rhythm. Lena couldn't stop laughing and crying at the same time. A week later, she traveled to the city once more, this time for her first lesson at the music center. The building was modern, filled with the faint sound of instruments echoing from every room. She felt small again, surrounded by people who seemed to know so much more. But when she sat at the piano, the nervousness faded. The teacher, a kind woman with gentle eyes, watched her play quietly, then said, "You don't read notes fluently, do you?" Lena shook her head nervously. "Not really," she admitted. "I just play what I feel." The teacher smiled. "That's okay. Feelings are the best place to start. The rest you'll learn." From that day on, Lena began a new routine. She still worked part-time at the diner to help her mother, but on her days off, she took lessons and practiced for hours at the center. It wasn't easy. There were moments she felt lost, when the theory made no sense or when her hands didn't move the way she wanted. But every time she wanted to give up, she remembered why she started. Because she loved the way music made people feel, the way it made her feel. Little by little, she began to improve. She learned to read music, to play classical pieces she had only ever heard in movies. Her teacher often said, "Technique can be taught, but soul can't. You already have the soul." Months passed, and she started performing at small local events. Each time the audience grew a little larger, the applause a little longer. Sometimes she would spot familiar faces, customers from the diner, friends from her neighborhood, even her mother sitting proudly in the front row. One evening after a recital, as she packed her music sheets, Daniel approached her again. "How does it feel?" he asked with a smile. Lena looked around the hall, the piano, the lights, the people. She thought about where she had come from, the sleepless nights, the fear, the small diner piano that had started it all. "It feels like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be," she said quietly. He nodded. "And this is just the beginning." That night, when she returned home, she sat by her window with her mother. The stars were bright and the air felt still. Her mother looked at her and said, "You've come so far, my girl." Lena smiled, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you." The old flyer that once changed everything was still pinned to the wall, faded and wrinkled. She looked at it for a moment, remembering the scared waitress who once thought she wasn't enough. Now she knew better. Dreams didn't need to be perfect. They just needed courage to begin. Lena barely slept the night before the competition. Her small apartment felt colder than usual, though it was probably just her nerves. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the sound of piano keys over and over. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the bright lights, the big stage, the quiet faces of people waiting for her to play. It both thrilled and terrified her. She had practiced every evening for weeks, sometimes until her fingers cramped. The old church piano she used was slightly out of tune, but she had grown used to its sound. The pastor had kindly allowed her to practice there after hours, and sometimes he would sit quietly in the back row, smiling as she played. He told her that music, when played from the heart, never needs perfection, it just needs honesty. She held on to those words like a lifeline. The morning of the competition arrived too soon. Lena stood before the mirror, adjusting the simple black dress her coworker had lent her. It wasn't fancy, but it made her feel presentable. Her hair was tied neatly, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to apply a bit of makeup. She wasn't used to any of this, the attention, the idea of people actually watching her. For years, she had played in silence in empty rooms where no one cared whether she missed a note. Now everything was different. As she stepped outside, the city seemed unusually alive. The streets buzzed with movement. Even the sky looked brighter. She carried her small bag with the music sheets, though she hardly needed them anymore. Her fingers already knew what to do. They remembered each note, each pause, each soft shift in rhythm. Still, she carried them as a comfort, something familiar to hold. The competition was held at a cultural hall downtown. The building looked massive compared to what she was used to. Its tall glass windows and marble floors made her feel small. People walked around dressed neatly, holding folders and instrument cases. She could hear snippets of piano scales and nervous laughter echoing from the rooms nearby. Everyone looked confident, like they belonged there. For a moment, she wanted to turn back. She stood by the entrance, frozen, staring at the crowd. Who was she kidding? She was just a waitress. She didn't come from a family of musicians. She had never even taken a lesson. Her hands weren't graceful. Her posture wasn't perfect. Maybe it was a mistake to come here. Then she remembered Mr. Grant's voice in her head. You have something special. Don't let fear bury it. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. The registration desk attendant gave her a small smile when she handed in her form. You're in Group B, number 12, the woman said kindly. You'll be called after the break. Good luck. Lena nodded, clutching the paper tightly. Her palms were sweating. In the waiting area, she sat on a bench beside other contestants. A young man next to her wore a tailored suit and practiced finger movements in the air, as if he'd done this 100 times before. Across the room, a teenage girl flipped through sheets of classical music, whispering the notes under her breath. Lena had none of that. She didn't even bring her piece on paper. It lived in her mind and heart. When her turn finally came closer, she could feel her heartbeat in her throat. The announcer called. Next performer, Lena from Brookside. Her legs felt heavy as she walked toward the stage. The light hit her eyes immediately, bright, almost blinding. The audience stretched out in front of her, a sea of quiet faces. Judges sat at a long table near the front, pens ready. One of them, a silver-haired man with glasses, glanced at her and gave a small nod. She sat down at the piano. It was a grand piano, polished to perfection. She had never played anything like it before. Her reflection shimmered on its surface. For a second, her hands hovered above the keys, shaking. Then she closed her eyes. In her mind, she wasn't on a stage anymore. She was back in the diner late at night, the smell of coffee and rain in the air, the soft hum of the refrigerator. Her fingers moved by instinct, just like they always did when no one was watching. The first notes were quiet, almost fragile. Then they grew stronger, filled with emotion. The melody wasn't perfect, it wasn't classical or complex, but it carried a story. It spoke of long nights, silent hopes, and small dreams that refused to die. It spoke of loneliness and courage, of finding light in dark corners. Her fingers moved faster now, her body leaning into the music. Every sound echoed through the hall. Some people in the audience closed their eyes. The melody rose, fell, then softened again like waves coming and going. Lena forgot the judges, the audience, the hall. Everything. She was lost in the sound, in the story she was telling through her hands. The last note came softly, fading into silence. For a moment there was nothing, no applause, no sound, just stillness. She slowly lifted her hands from the keys, her breath uneven. Then the silence broke. The audience began to clap, slow at first, then louder until it filled the hall. Some people even stood up. Lena blinked, confused. She hadn't expected that reaction. She turned slightly and saw the judges talking quietly among themselves. The silver-haired man looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between surprise and deep respect. He nodded again, more firmly this time. When she walked off stage, her legs trembled. She found a quiet corner backstage and sat down, holding her hands together. She felt tears building up but quickly wiped them away. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. A young woman who had performed earlier approached her, smiling. That was beautiful, she said softly. You play with so much feeling. I could tell it meant something to you. Lena smiled shyly. Thank you, she whispered. When the results were announced later that afternoon, Lena didn't expect much. She listened quietly as names were read, clapping politely for each one. Then she heard her own name. Special Performance Award. Lena for original composition and emotional expression. Her breath caught. People turned to look at her, smiling. She walked up to receive her certificate, her hands shaking again. The silver-haired judge was the one handing it out. When she approached him, he said in a calm voice, "That was one of the most heartfelt performances I've heard in years. You remind me why I fell in love with music in the first place." Lena didn't know what to say. All she could manage was a quiet, "Thank you, sir." After the event ended, she stepped outside into the evening air. The city lights shimmered on the pavement. She sat on a bench nearby, the certificate still in her hand. Everything felt unreal. She thought of the diner, of her friends cheering her on, of Mr. Grant and his quiet belief in her. Her phone buzzed with a message from one of her coworkers. "We saw the live stream. You were amazing. Everyone at the diner is so proud." Lena laughed softly. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel small. She felt like she had finally stepped into the world she was always meant to be part of. That night, when she returned home, she placed the certificate on her table and sat by the window. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Maybe this is just the beginning." Somewhere deep inside, she knew that life would never be the same again. She had walked onto that stage as a waitress who loved to play piano, and walked off as someone who had finally been heard. But what she didn't know yet was that her story was far from over. The next few days would bring something she never imagined, something that would turn her small moment on stage into a story the whole world would talk about. Lena woke up the next morning still unsure if everything that had happened the day before was even real. Her certificate lay on the small table near the window, catching the sunlight that streamed in through the curtains. She stared at it for a long time, her heart swelling with quiet disbelief. Just a few days ago, she had been pouring coffee and wiping tables at the diner, never thinking anyone outside those four walls would ever know her name. Her phone buzzed again. She picked it up slowly, expecting maybe a message from one of her coworkers. But this time it wasn't just a message. It was a string of notifications, social media tags, messages, and comments. Confused, she clicked on one. Someone had posted a short clip of her performance from the competition. It was spreading fast. The caption read, "The waitress who played her heart out." Within minutes, she saw thousands of likes and shares. People were leaving comments like, "This gave me chills," and "She plays like she's telling a story." Lena stared at the screen, speechless. She didn't even know the video had been recorded. It had only been one night, and suddenly her name was everywhere. At first, she didn't know how to feel. She wasn't used to attention. She had always lived quietly, blending into the background. Now strangers were writing about her, praising her, calling her the girl who played from her soul. When she walked into the diner that morning, everyone turned to look. The cook grinned from behind the counter, waving his spatula. "Look who we have here, the internet's new star," he teased warmly. Her coworkers clapped and cheered, and one of them handed her a small box of cupcakes with the words, "You did it," written in icing. Lena blushed, laughing shyly. "I don't think I'm a star," she said, but deep down her heart was glowing. All day people came into the diner just to see her. Some of them had seen the viral video. They smiled when she brought their orders and said things like, "We watched your performance last night," or "My daughter wants to learn piano after hearing you." She couldn't believe it. The same people who once barely noticed her now looked at her like she was someone special. Later that week, she received an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar. When she answered, a polite voice introduced himself as a representative from a local television station. "We'd love to feature your story," the man said. "People have been talking about your performance nonstop. Would you be open to doing a short interview?" Lena hesitated. She wasn't sure she belonged on TV. But after a moment, she agreed. It wasn't about fame, she just wanted to share her love for music. A few days later, the crew came to the diner to film. They asked her questions about her life, her background, and what inspired her music. She spoke honestly about her late-night practice sessions, her struggles, and how she found comfort in the piano when life got heavy. She didn't try to sound impressive. She just told the truth. The reporter smiled as she spoke, clearly moved. When the segment aired, the response was overwhelming. The station received hundreds of messages from viewers saying her story inspired them. One message read, "She reminded me that dreams don't die, they just wait for the right time." But the moment that truly changed everything came a week later. Lena was closing the diner, late one evening when the door opened and a familiar face walked in. It was the silver-haired judge from the competition. She froze for a second, not expecting to ever see him again. He walked up to the counter, smiling gently. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said kindly. "I just wanted to see you in person before I leave town. Your performance has stayed with me since that day." Lena felt her heart race. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. "I didn't expect you to come here." He nodded, glancing around the small diner. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he continued. "You have something rare, Lena. Your music comes from an honest place. It's not about technique, it's about emotion. I've been teaching and judging for years, and it's rare to find someone who can make an audience feel something real." She listened quietly, not sure what to say. I have connections with a few programs and foundations that support new artists, he said. If you're interested, I'd like to help you get a scholarship to study music properly. It won't cost you anything. You've already proven you have what it takes. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She felt a lump in her throat. All those nights of practicing in silence, all the doubts she had, it suddenly felt like they led to this moment. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Just say you'll keep playing, he replied warmly. That's all that matters. When he left, Lena stood behind the counter for a long time, tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. She didn't cry from sadness, but from the feeling of something changing, something beautiful and unexpected. The next few weeks moved quickly. She was offered a spot in a local arts academy, where she could learn piano formally. The foundation covered her tuition and provided her with access to a real grand piano for practice. For the first time in her life, she could play without worrying about closing shifts or noise complaints. But she didn't quit the diner completely. She still worked a few days a week. It kept her grounded, reminded her where she came from. Her co-workers supported her every step of the way. When she showed them her student ID card from the academy, they hugged her like she'd won a trophy. At the academy, she felt nervous at first. Most students had years of training. They could read complex sheets and talk about music theory in ways she didn't fully understand. But Lena learned fast. She stayed late after class, practicing for hours. Sometimes she still made mistakes, but her teachers noticed something unique about her. Every time she played, it was full of feeling. One of them told her, "You can teach technique, but you can't teach emotion. You already have what can't be learned." As months passed, her confidence grew. She began performing at small local events, community gatherings, school recitals, even a few open mics. Every time she played, she remembered that diner, the sound of dishes clattering and the smell of coffee in the air. That was where it all started. One evening, as she was practicing in the academy's piano room, she received an email invitation. It was from a large music festival in the city. They had seen her story online and wanted her to perform on the main stage. She read the message twice, hardly believing it. The night of the festival, as she stood backstage, she felt the same nervous flutter she had before the competition. But this time she wasn't afraid. She had learned something over the past months, that fear never really goes away, but courage means showing up anyway. When she walked onto the stage, the lights felt familiar now, almost comforting. She sat down at the piano and closed her eyes. The audience waited, and then she began to play. It was the same piece she had played months ago, the one that had started everything. But this time it sounded fuller, deeper, more alive. Each note carried her journey. The sleepless nights, the endless work shifts, the quiet belief that one day her music would matter. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet again, just like before. But this time it wasn't just surprise, it was admiration. As she stood up and bowed, she caught sight of someone in the front row. It was Mr. Grant. He was clapping proudly, his eyes shining. She smiled, remembering how all this began, with a simple conversation in a diner and a flyer for a piano contest. That night, as she sat alone by the stage after everyone had left, she looked at her hands and whispered, "Thank you." Not just to him, but to every moment that had led her here. She didn't know what the future would bring, whether she'd ever be famous or not, but that no longer mattered. She had found something far more precious. She had found her voice. Months passed, and life began to feel like something out of a dream for Lena. Everything that had once seemed impossible was slowly becoming real. She still lived in her small apartment, still worked a few shifts at the diner, but her days now had a new rhythm. She would wake up early, walk to the academy, and spend hours practicing on a real grand piano. It was something she used to only imagine. Every time her fingers touched the keys, she remembered the old cracked one in the corner of the diner, and smiled. Her teacher often said that her playing had a rare kind of honesty. She didn't play to impress. She played to feel. The other students respected her deeply, not because she was famous, but because she carried something different: humility and heart. She didn't speak much about her viral fame, but word had spread. Some of them had seen her video online before meeting her. They'd whisper, "That's her, the waitress who played like a poet." But Lena never let it get to her head. When people praised her, she always said, "I'm just thankful I get to do what I love." One afternoon, after a long day of lessons, She sat alone in the practice hall, playing softly. The sunlight from the tall windows painted warm streaks across the floor. She wasn't practicing for a show or a grade. She was just letting her heart breathe through the music. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed with a call. She almost ignored it, but when she looked, she noticed the number had a city code she didn't recognize. "Hello?" She answered gently. A woman's voice replied. "Hi, is this Lena? I'm calling from the Harmony Music Foundation in New York. We came across your story and your performances online. We'd love to invite you to play at our annual charity concert next month. It's an event where rising musicians perform alongside professionals to raise funds for children's music programs." For a few seconds, Lena didn't speak. Her mind couldn't process the words fast enough. "You mean in New York?" she finally asked. "Yes," the woman said, smiling through her voice. "All expenses will be covered. We just want you and your music." Lena thanked her, hung up, and sat silently for a long moment. She felt her eyes fill with tears, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from gratitude. That night, she called Mr. Grant to tell him the news. He laughed joyfully. "See, I told you the world would hear you one day," he said. "You just needed a chance." The following weeks were a blur of preparation. The academy teachers helped her refine her performance. The diner crew surprised her with a little farewell party before her trip, decorating the place with paper stars and writing, "Good luck, Lena," on the chalkboard wall. They handed her a small envelope filled with notes from regular customers, each one wishing her well. When she boarded the plane for New York, her heart raced. She had never flown before. Looking out the window as the city lights below faded into clouds, she thought of how far she had come, from quiet nights in a small-town diner to a grand stage in one of the biggest cities in the world. The concert was held in a large theater, the kind she had only seen on television. Rows of red velvet seats stretched out before a golden stage curtain. Musicians tuned their instruments backstage, and volunteers bustled around organizing the event. Everyone looked professional and confident, yet when she introduced herself, they welcomed her warmly. On the night of the concert, as she stood backstage waiting for her turn, Lena felt the familiar nervous flutter return. Her heart thumped against her chest. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and reminded herself, this wasn't about proving anything. It was about sharing something true. When her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage. The audience was huge, but she didn't let herself look at them for long. She focused on the piano, on the gentle glow of the lights and the quiet she felt inside before the first note. Her fingers touched the keys, and she began to play the same piece that had started everything. But this time it sounded different, richer, more alive. Each note carried pieces of her journey. The clinking dishes at the diner, the sound of rain against the windows, the laughter of her co-workers, the warmth of Mr. Grant's encouragement. Her heart poured into every note. As she reached the final part of the piece, the music grew softer, almost like a whisper. She lifted her hands gently at the end, and for a second the entire hall was silent. Then the audience rose to their feet. The applause came like a wave, powerful and endless. Tears blurred her vision as she bowed. She had never felt anything like it. Not pride, but peace. After the performance, a group of children from the charity program came to meet her backstage. One little girl hugged her tightly and said, "When I grow up, I want to play the piano just like you." That single sentence meant more to her than any award. Over the next few months, Lena's story spread even further. She received more invitations, some to perform, some to speak about her journey. But no matter where she went, she stayed true to who she was. She still returned to her small town between shows, sometimes stopping by the diner just to sit with her old friends. One rainy afternoon, she walked into the diner unannounced. The cook looked up from the grill, grinned, and shouted, "Look who's home!" Everyone clapped and cheered. She laughed, wiping her eyes as she hugged them all. It felt like coming full circle. Mr. Grant was there too, sitting at his usual corner booth. He looked at her proudly. "You've done more than I ever imagined," he said softly. "But tell me, how does it feel now that the whole world knows your name?" Lena smiled, pulling out a chair to sit across from him. "Honestly," she said, "it feels the same. I'm still me. I still make mistakes. I still get nervous before I play. The only difference is, now I don't hide my music anymore," he chuckled, nodding. That's the best kind of success, the kind that doesn't change your heart. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while. The sound of rain tapping the windows filled the air, and for a moment it felt just like the night it all began. As the evening went on, she played a few soft tunes on the old diner piano. The keys were still a little uneven, the sound still slightly off-key, but it didn't matter. The customers clapped anyway. Some took out their phones to record her, but she didn't mind. It wasn't about going viral this time. It was about sharing something real with people who had believed in her when no one else did. Later that night, as the diner lights dimmed and the last few customers left, she stayed behind to clean up just like the old days. She looked around the quiet room and smiled. It had once been her whole world, a place that kept her grounded when she had nothing else. Before leaving, she pressed a small piece of paper against the piano frame. It was a handwritten note that said, "Never stop dreaming even when the world feels silent." She didn't sign it. She didn't have to. Weeks later, the diner owner framed that note and hung it on the wall near the counter. It became something everyone noticed, a small reminder that big dreams can start in the smallest places. Years passed, and Lena's music reached even more people. She performed in different countries, released albums that told her story through melodies, and always used her success to support young musicians who couldn't afford lessons. Every time she stepped on a stage, she carried a piece of that little diner inside her, a reminder of where she began, but no matter how far she went, she always stayed humble. When people asked about her journey, she'd smile and say, "I was just a waitress once. I never thought anyone would listen." But music has a way of finding those who need it most, and in every audience someone always smiled. Maybe because they saw themselves in her, someone ordinary who dared to believe. Her story wasn't about luck or miracles. It was about patience, kindness, and the courage to take a single chance when it comes your way. And so, from the quiet sound of coffee cups in a small-town diner to the grand pianos of the world's biggest stages, Lena's music never changed, because it was never about fame. It was about the heart behind every note, the story behind every sound, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone out there would hear it and remember, dreams don't disappear, they just wait for you to find them again.